In this video, we'll talk about intervals and what the intervals are between scale degrees in minor keys or minor scales. The intervals that are formed between tonic and all other scale degrees in a natural minor scale, or simply a minor scale, are all minor or perfect except between scale degrees 1 and 2. I have provided here an example of A minor, and you can see that clearly that between A and B, scale degrees 1 and 2, you have a major second. And of all the intervals formed between scale degrees and all the other scale degrees and scale degree 1, that is the only one that is not minor or perfect. Next we have 1 and 3, which is a minor third. 1 and 4 is a perfect fourth. A perfect fifth next. A minor sixth. Minor seventh. And then just for the sake of completing here the octave, I've included also 2 tonics, right? 2 scale degree 1 forming an octave there. As before, when we discussed intervals between scale degrees in major scales or major keys, the intervals between certain scale degrees of a minor scale are always going to be the same for those same scale degrees in all other minor scales, right? So if you're looking, for example here, scale degrees 2 and 6, they are always going to form a diminished fifth in any minor scale, in any natural minor scale, to be more specific, regardless of the scale you choose. Here I have chosen D minor and A flat minor, but I could have chosen A minor. I could have chosen a variety of different things, any minor scale, and they would always turn out to be diminished fifths, right? The interval between 2 and 6. Here we have in D minor E and B flat, and that is a diminished fifth. And in A flat minor, we would have B flat as 2 and F flat as 6, right? Also a diminished fifth. So I think it's just important to highlight here that these relationships between scale degrees are always the same. The intervals are always the same, regardless of the minor scale that you choose. However, with minor scales, we have an added layer of complexity or difficulty, which is that a minor scale can have one of 3 forms or appearances, so to speak. The natural minor scale is the one that abides by the key signature, that is obeying with the accidentals that are provided to it, right, in the key signature. However, as the music demands, composers will often raise scale degree 7, that subtonic, to a leading tone to increase the pull back towards tonic, right, reducing the distance that was of a whole tone to that of a semitone. And once we do that, then the intervals change between scale degrees. Here's an example of all of the intervals in relation back to the tonic, right? So you can see that all of them are the same except the interval between scale degrees 1 and 7, which before was a minor 7th and now is a major 7th, right? So we've gone to major 2nd, minor 3rd, perfect 4th, perfect 5th, minor 6th, a very special major 7th, closing with the octave, right? And in the melodic minor scale, also called the ascending melodic minor scale, because it was often used in ascending gestures, right? If it came down, it typically wouldn't have raised scale degree 6 and 7, but because it does when it goes up, the melodic minor scale then changes the intervals even a little bit more. So you can see here that now between scale degrees 6 and 1, or 1 and 6 rather, we have a major 6, whereas before we had a minor 6, right? If you'll remember our intervals between tonic and the other scale degrees in a major scale, it was very much like this, except for the relationship here between 1 and 3, which was in a major scale a major third. So you can see that a melodic minor scale is very similar in composition, right, in its internal structure, to a major scale, except for this third here, which is different, which in this case here is a minor third. Let's go back to the natural minor scale, our kind of a default or status quo, right? It's what is mostly used, except for certain passages in music that require the use of the harmonic or melodic minor scale. Here we have all of the seconds that are possible in there, all of the thirds and all of the fourths. Just a quick glance at it, if you'll remember our tallying up all of the possible seconds, thirds, and fourths in a major scale, what we have here is the same amount and types of intervals, right? For example, we noted before that we had 6 perfect fourths in major scales and 1 augmented fourth. That happens to be the exact same thing we have in a natural minor scale too. The only difference is that before, in a major scale, the augmented fourth was between scale degrees 4 and 7, and here it is the ascending interval between 6 and 2. Right, that is the difference. And that should come as no surprise, since we are using, after all, the same pattern of whole tones and semitones for both major and minor scales, except that major scales will start at a different point than minor scales will, and vice versa, right? Basically, what I'm trying to say is both major and minor scales are using the same set of notes, the same key signature, if you will, but starting at a different point. If you imagine a piano keyboard, a major scale is obtained by playing all of the white keys from C to C, right? And a minor scale is obtained by playing the same white keys, which will form the same patterns of whole tones and semitones, except that I'm starting it in A or on A and ending on A as well. Right? So because we're using, for example, if you would imagine that white keys only, the intervals will tally up to be the same, except they will show up in different positions than they did in the major scale. Right? So maybe this is the biggest takeaway of seeing the intervals formed between scale degrees in a minor key. They're essentially the same, but they happen in different places. Here we have fifths, sixths, and sevenths, which once again is sort of redundant because you could have gotten to them by inverting seconds, thirds, and fourths, right? So for example, as we saw before, we have 6 perfect fifths and 1 diminished fifth, right? The perfect inversion here of the perfect fourths and the augmented fourth. And the same is true for sixths and sevenths. But as before, since we're dealing with the minor scale, things can get a little bit more complicated when using one of the 2 possible variants of the minor scale. So in this case here, I'm providing seconds, thirds, and fourths in the harmonic minor scale. You can get fifths, sixths, and sevenths by inverting these, right? Notice here how now I do not have the same intervals or the same amount, the same type of intervals as I had in a major scale, because I'm adding accidentals to those white keys, so to speak. So now I have our major and minor seconds as before, but I also have an augmented second. This is an oddity, right? This is part of the reason why the harmonic minor scale feels the way it feels, a little bit odd in the Western classical canon, at least, because of that large gap here between scale degree 6 and the raised scale degree 7, which sounds like this, right? I mean, and by odd, I don't mean anything disrespectful necessarily. Not that one could be disrespectful toward a musical scale. It means that it stands out, right, from what we have seen before. Major thirds and minor thirds essentially vary there's nothing new. It's major and minor thirds, but they're distributed differently, right? And look at perfect fourths. Excuse me, just fourths. Before we had 6 perfect fourths and 1 augmented fourth. Now we have 1, 2, 3, 4 perfect fourths, 2 augmented fourths, and a diminished fourth, right? Once again, these intervals that are augmented and diminished, which happened much less commonly now in the harmonic minor scale, are showing up more. Part of the reason, once again, that this scale was used to fulfill its purpose of augmenting that pull. Perhaps augmenting here is not the best word, but enhancing that pull between the leading tone and the tonic. But in its wake, it creates all of these intervals that, at least for European Baroque and classical ears, were harder to digest. Check out the intervals of a melodic minor scale. So once again, we have major seconds and minor seconds. Very similar here to what we had before. Now we don't have an augmented second. That problem is solved. Hooray! But as we will see later, it comes with its own set of quote-unquote problems, right? Of other intervals that are less common. Major thirds and minor thirds evenly distributed, once again. And I think it goes without saying that all of these intervals is not necessary that you memorize it, really. If you can picture in your mind a minor scale. I have provided here A minor because that for me is the easiest minor scale to picture, to have in my mind, because it only uses white keys in the natural minor version of it, and then I can quickly think about what I need to alter in the harmonic and melodic minor scale. But all of these relationships are true for all minor scales, right? All melodic minor scales. Check out the fourths now. So you can see that we still have the same problem, quote-unquote problem, right, as we had before. 1, 2, 3, 4 perfect fourths, 2 augmented fourths, and we still have the very weird diminished fourth in there. So yes, the melodic minor scale resolves that quote-unquote problem, right? That big augmented second here between 6 and 7 by raising scale degree 6, but it maintains the same patterns or the same amount and types of fourths as the harmonic did. Maybe this is the reason why it was also used sparingly, or it has been used, or traditionally it is used sparingly in music. Okay, I think this is all there needs to be said about intervals in minor scales and in major scales as well. And once again, my last piece of advice is what is true for one scale, the relationship that is true between scale degrees, the interval that is formed between any scale degrees, are always going to be the same for all other scales of the same type, of the same mode, all major scales or minor scales or harmonic minor or melodic minor, as long as the relationship is between those same scale degrees, right? And if you have trouble memorizing it, or actually I don't even recommend going over this and memorizing what it is, you know, between 1 and 2 major second, 2 and 3 minor second, I don't think that's advisable. Rather, picture in your mind your major scale or minor scale of preference and try and calculate the interval there, right? So if in my mind I think in D minor, for whatever reason it really comes to, or for example, you're a guitarist, E minor feels very natural. What is the interval between scale degrees 2 and 4 in any minor scale? If I picture E minor, I'm thinking F sharp and A, and that is a minor third. Boom, you got it. So you have what the interval is for all minor scales. All right, so next video we'll talk about triads, which basically is stacking intervals together.